Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Yes and Ask Me, a show out of San Antonio, Texas, where I, Rick, get to interview some of the senior level players here in the San Antonio improv community. Um, uh, Today's show is going to be about agreement. This is something that I think anybody who has done improv before understands because you probably learned it in your level 1 class. But I want to go a little bit deeper when talking to some of these local senior level players here in San Antonio. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my panel now. My first guest is Tina Jackson. Tina, would you care to join us?
Sure enough.
Hey, Tina.
Hi.
So, Tina, I want to give a quick little introduction because, Tina, you are the owner of Bexar Stage here in San Antonio.
I am.
Fantastic. I also, for anybody who is joining us for the very first time, Tina was my level 4 and a level 6 instructor at Bexar Stage. Tina, thank you very much for being my teacher. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, you know what? It's always worth it.
Fantastic. Let me go ahead and introduce my next panel member. Steve Circeo, please join us.
Hey, how's it going, Rick?
Good, I'm doing good, Steve. Thank you for joining us. Steve?
It looks like we're in the same house, but we're not. We just have the same color walls.
Right. We both live in apartments, so.
I want to see you walk into each other's panels. That'd be hilarious. Steve, so I know you to be a member of the San Antonio improv community as well. Can you give us a little bit of background about your improv experience?
Well, I was a filmmaker, so I took an improv course on a whim in order to meet actors. When I was first told I had to do a show at the end of the class, I was pretty mortified and frightened. But I did it, and I kind of fell in love with being on stage, or mostly though because it assisted in my learning more about improv. I just love the learning of it, and that was about 3 years ago now. So sadly, or perhaps fortunately for me, that makes me one of the senior improvisers in San Antonio because it's such a young community.
It is. It really is. Yeah. Wonderful. And again, I know you through this community. And Steve, I've taken some classes with you. I performed on stage with you. So you and I go back at least a little bit, but that's only probably about a year, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Steve. My next guest is Brian Scribner. Brian, would you like to join us right now? Brian, how are you today?
I'm peachy.
That's great. I can tell. Brian, you are another one of the senior level improvisers here in the San Antonio community. I know you also through Bexar Stage, specifically because you were my level 1, level 2, and level 3 instructor.
Yes, I taught you all the bad things.
So this is actually this is wonderful because Brian, as a level 1 instructor, you are responsible for teaching some of the basics, the yesing, the agreement, that sort of stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I learned that from you. So what I want to do is actually ask Tina to give us a description, some basics of what agreement is, what yes and is, and then we're going to come back to Steve and to Brian to get their perspective as well. So Tina, agreement, yes and, how do they tie in together, and why are they important in improv?
Yes and improv agreement they go together, but it's like one of the first things we teach during our level 1 day 1 class, and I think that's true for a lot of theaters. And one reason we teach it first is because it's the underlying grounding principle that really goes through all of our lessons is try it, agree with the world, right? Yes and doesn't always mean saying the words yes and. Although we do that as an exercise, right? That's a good way to sort of practice your brain using some of those techniques. But the idea of agreement in improv and agreeing to agree is just foundationally one of the best parts of playing improv is whatever you're creating, I'm going there with you. I agree that what you create is good and I'm going there with you. The and portion of yes and is what you add to it that your partner then gets to agree with. Right? I agree to your thing. Now here's my thing, and now we're going there together. So it's the way that we get you from never trying improv, or maybe having some college experience or high school experience or whatever, but gets you in the door and says, agree that we are all here together to create something together. It doesn't, you don't agree with something, or you shouldn't agree with something just to create your own thing that doesn't need anybody else, right? That's not what improv is. So it's one of the first lessons we learn, is it's part of the collaboration.
Yeah. So Brian, being a level 1 instructor, teaching the basics of improv, of yes and, of agreement, and also being one of the senior level players here in San Antonio, what I'd like to hear from you is, do you find that a newbie improviser does agreement in a different way than someone who's been doing improv for 2 or 3 or 5 years?
For the most part, agreement is for some people, it's one of the most difficult things to do, because agreement means accepting that your idea is truth. And it forces you to go, hey, I might have been thinking of something different, but I'm going to put that aside, or not jump on that. And I'm going to go with what you're going with. And I'm going to go there with you, and we're going to go full blast, especially if it's something that doesn't work out logically, doesn't make sense, in the real world. We're on the moon. Well, we can't be on the moon because oxygen isn't there. How do we get there? I don't like space. No, just yes, we're on the moon, and we'll figure everything out together from there. It forces you to go back to being a child, honestly. Puts you back in that spot where you and your friends are playing, and somebody goes, I'm a superhero, and the other person goes, I'm a princess, and the other person goes, I'm an accountant. And yep, that's true. Huh? That's
What was
what
that
I
to you?
always pick.
Was the accountant?
Yeah, I always pick the accountant.
That's you. Well, playground's like, I'll take the numbers.
Brian, is it easy? Is agreement always easy in improv?
No, not at all. Not in the least. Because again, you come in with preconceived ideas. Somebody throws out something and says, okay, you guys are on the moon, go. And one person has one idea of what that means. One person has another idea of what that means. And usually whoever talks first goes, that's where we end up. So it's again trying to make things work together. Agreement makes things continue, whereas non-agreement, just you end up doing this.
Mhm.
Just
We teach first in our level 1 class is the difference between yes and no, being so pivotal in moving a scene forward. I mean, you can't move forward without a yes. You really can't. It halts the whole scene, and we get tied up in an argument of the moment of my idea, no, my idea, no, my idea, no, my idea, and it's boring. We can't watch it. It's unwatchable. It's awful. So even just saying yes to an idea that, even if it is a bad idea, like if you want to qualify ideas that way, even if it's a bad idea, to say yes to it means we can at least move past this argument and into the next moment. So there's a forward momentum to yes, and there's obviously a stopping momentum to no.
Yeah. And that can be a hard thing. I remember when I was first starting, I had a hard time with I had a lot of judgment, right? And just talking about Brian, talking about the moon, but there's no oxygen. That was really tough for me because I'm a very logical person. I don't portray a lot of emotions. And I remember reading early on, I think it was in the TJ and Dave book, that, you're just doing the next little thing there. The scene's already there. You're just doing the next little thing to keep it going. We're not necessarily building the scene. We're not creating it. It's already there. We're just discovering it. I read that early on. I always aspire to be able to improvise that way, and I haven't reached that pinnacle yet, or even close to it. But that little piece of advice just kind of keeps me going and helps me suspend judgment, and not just on my teammates, right? I mean, on myself. I'm going out there and I'm supposed to be an English squire, and I'm doing this English accent, and immediately it's like, that's a shitty English accent. Oh, am I allowed to curse here? That's a bad English accent. Why am I come, and then it just goes away. That takes you right out of the scene, right? So little things like that. I mean, that's just a little bit of agreement. Agree with yourself too. Don't just agree, not just your teammates, but make sure you're agreeing with yourself, because your moves are not problems. They're not bad moves. They're just opportunities for you to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point is that you alluded to, and just to say it out loud, is I think judgment is the opponent of agreement.
Yeah.
I think the reason that you have trouble agreeing in a scene is because you're judging the choices that your partner has made and you think you've got a better one. And so you say no to their idea and yes to your own, or you have trouble, like you said, judging your own choices, right? So you're saying no to yourself. It's like, maybe I should be a different kind of English classes. I can't do English so good, right? And then all of a sudden it's like you fall out of your accent, or you change something, or that's when you add the moment that's like, cut, oh, we're on a movie set because I don't want to continue doing this thing. Agree with that world. Agree with that beautiful world that you're building. Agree that that's the English accent that this character has, and that can be an opportunity then to like also have your scene partner take on that accent, and it might be awful and it might be great, but it's at least moving.
Well, I love that idea, and I love how, so Brian, you mentioned earlier that you kind of have to go back to being a kid, and Steve, you mentioned that this is a process, this agreement process is something that you're still learning along the way. And Tina, you mentioned that judgment is the opposite, or maybe the enemy of agreement. Would you guys agree that somewhere along the way we're having to unlearn the stuff that we pull from the real world when we come to improv?
Every kid knows how to imagine.
Yeah.
Every single kid draws crazy things, and they don't care about gravity. They're on the moon, or they're in outer space, or they're princesses and ballerinas and
Accountants.
And accountants, right? Dream big, baby. Kids dream huge, right? They can also dream, playing house on the playground where it's just mom, dad, sister, brother, baby. But kids dream in all sizes. And we as adults, as we grow, start putting limits. We can't think that way. We can't do this. We can't do that. Adulthood is full of can'ts and shouldn'ts and won'ts. And I think improv is the unlocking, is a method of unlocking sort of that inner child, and going back to some of those roots of like anything is possible in improv, and the only way we get there is together.
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge. And Steve certainly, I would say, as a level 1 student in my classroom, like definitely had a trouble with agreement, but I think it came out of a place of judgment of, I don't want to do that thing that you want me to do. Right? Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, for sure. And once again, it comes down to being logical, overly logical, and not a fun person in general. I just got a note that says my internet connection is unstable, so if I can, but it's, I'm not, fun to me is not necessarily getting on stage and doing silly stuff. It just isn't. So I still, I'm very happy we have a team, Final Gimmick, that I love being part of, and we have fun and we do weird stuff, and Rick and I often have weird scenes together. And it's fun. So I don't know, maybe I'll break through that before I'm resting in my final place, but I hope so. But I don't even know whether I'm reliving my childhood or living my first one right now with that kind of stuff. I don't know that I was ever that place.
That's great, because certainly some of the things I've seen you do on stage have been so incredible, especially having watched you come from a level 1 place to where I think you are now. It's like not just all the education you have and all the experience that you've gained, but how playful I think you are now, which I think was, I think you would agree too, was a hindrance to you at the beginning of the journey. So I love watching you be playful and accept others' ideas, and I think Final Gimmick is a perfect example of that. But even in your regular play style, doing something a little bit more dramatic like Therapy 3.0, where do you find agreement in that when you're doing a mono scene, right?
Yeah. Well, really, it's a matter of, I think this is another TJ and Dave thing, the quantum leap method, where, you know, where Scott Bakula's character was put into the body of somebody he doesn't even know. And he's just in the middle of this scene. And so he has to like pay very close attention. You know, who am I? Who is this person to me? And that's really, once again, the idea that the scene is already there, right? We're just discovering it. So it's just a matter of paying real close attention. And if somebody says that you are a writer for Time Magazine, then that's what you are. And just like Scott Bakula and Quantum Leap, you're just now you know that about yourself. And so you accept that and continue to move forward.
That's so funny. Do you feel out of body like that and on stage? Where you're like in
Yeah,
heaven?
I wish I did. Yeah, I wish I could.
You don't want to know.
Yeah, but that is the goal one day. So I do every once in a while feel that I'm accomplishing that. You know, we'll get there.
I love what you said about the quantum leap theory, where it comes to using hyper listening, which is another thing we teach, to discover, like you said, discover things about yourself, right? So somebody says that you're a librarian, you're like, oh, I am, right? It's like there's an immediate acceptance that happens there because you're using listening to hear truth and not question it. That's who I am. That's who I am because you said it. And I think that's one of those things that, like, if you can hear your scene partner with that kind of importance of whatever your scene partner is saying is true, that I think that can be a beautiful gift to yourself, is to just accept that and let that be true and move on.
My level 5 instructor, Les Simpson, used to use this expression, and he would say, pass the fork. So the first time I heard that, I was like, what the hell do you mean pass the fork? When he explained it, what he meant was that you're in a scene and your scene partner says, pass the fork. Pass the fork. Give your scene partner the fork that they just created right there for you on stage. And I love the idea of discovering what your world is on stage. It already exists there. And it's like, Tina, you mentioned earlier, it's not just about saying yes to everything that your scene partner says. It's about, if they say pass the fork, grab the fork and go ahead and pass it to them. And that right there, that is a physical agreement that you just gave to your scene partner.
Absolutely. Yes is not just a verbal agreement. It can be a physical, it can be a silent agreement. Brian, ooh, look at, yeah, he got so excited. Silent, I love using silence in improv. Ooh, I love silence. But even just an expression of like, what you said is true, but I don't want to believe it. It's like, can you agree with something? It's like, well, I'm processing it as my character and I don't like, it's like, I agree with your world. I don't want to start a fight right now. And that might be my next line. But, you can use silent agreement, physical agreement, verbal agreement. And sometimes even saying yes in the scene can use the word no, right? One of the things that we had a question about in the chat on Wednesday was what do you say to somebody who's like, oh, I don't want to take improv. I would never take your class because I heard you can't say no. And it's like, you can say no all the time. No is part of what is true about the world. But saying no can be a yes and to the agreement of the scene. Because what you're agreeing to is the world, not specifically the words, but agreeing to the world that's being created by you and your scene partners. So if I say, Dad, please, can I have the last ice cream, please? And Brian says no.
No, you look, you didn't eat dinner. Eat dinner first.
Yeah.
Then
right?
we'll.
Just because I ask for something doesn't mean he has to give it to me.
Yeah.
But he has to agree that I want it, it's real, and there is one ice cream in that freezer.
Yeah.
We agree, if he says, well, you didn't win the competition and therefore you can't have, whatever you say to me is also true about the world. And he's going to eat it. God damn it, Brian. Damn it, give it back, Brian.
That's okay. I don't like this kind.
And in that particular situation too, that you just did, I mean, that's further creating the relationship between the two, which is the basis for any interesting improv scene, as far as I'm concerned.
Or is that, I think anybody should be concerned. That's a personal opinion. But
I see a lot of game stuff.
yeah. But we, you know, there's a lot of improv rules out there, and some improv classes that I've been in, and granted, not for a while, I think that attitude is changing. But one of the first improv classes I ever took, they said, no, you can never say no. I was like, what? That seems crazy, because real conversation often involves no's. You don't have to agree with everything somebody says to still have a relationship with somebody. So no, the word was forbidden in other rules. But the only rules we ever ask anybody to agree to when they come into our classes, because every other rule besides these three, I think, have gray areas where it's like, well, sometimes you can do that and sometimes you can do that. But like we say, agree, commit, and listen. Those are the three rules we ask for in every scene. Agree, commit, and listen. We already agreed earlier that listening is very much a part of agreement. You have to hear what somebody says or see what somebody does to agree with what they've done. You commit to it by saying, yeah, it's true and it's infallible because it is true, and we agree with it and we move on. Agree, commit, and listen, and they all accomplish some similar things, but it's the foundation of what makes improv work, is the collaboration between two or more artists.
And I
Hey,
think
Brian.
that was really often the basis of my failure is commitment. You know, going half-heartedly into being a pirate.
The pirate.
Somebody like Daryl,
Remembering exactly.
one of my favorite
scene.
ever.
I think it was one of your level one. You're like, I don't want to be a pirate, and I said, do it anyway.
I don't want to be in space. I don't want to be a pirate. I just want to do really grounded, real scene work. And to this day, that's true. But I've learned to be able to make those other types of scenes into grounded scenes as well. But yeah, you got to commit to that. And you're a pirate now, so commit to it and don't judge it and just do it. And you may look like an idiot doing it, but whatever, you just got to do it.
Be a pirate.
Be a pirate.
You can choose what you're.
So Steve, are you saying that by not committing to something that you just agreed to and dropping it, are you saying that that's sort of like a failure of agreement?
That's a denial right there, right? Unless you come up with a real strong, you know, I guess, but no, it's still a denial. Even then, it's a soft denial. So yeah, if you're a pirate, just be a pirate, man. And if somebody says, grab your sword, we're gonna go fight this dragon, don't say you can't find your sword. You got the sword. Go fight the dragon. You know, it's
the dragon. The dragon's gonna be way more interesting.
Yeah. Nobody says you have to have a big sword. Just come out like this. I'm ready. I'm ready.
Look for cocktails.
What was that
Arg!
scene with the tiny sword fight? That was.
Yep.
Put it back in your martini glass.
Hey, Brian,
Yeah.
I want to know about some of the challenges that you've had teaching level one students that have a hard time grasping agreement. I know that they're out there. I know that it comes really easy to some maybe more creative types. I don't know. But I know that there are some other personalities who just have a really difficult time getting that basic agreement in every improv scene. How do you help them get there?
It's anybody, for people that have done sports before in their life, for people that have done any training for anything, repetition, and then when you think you got it, more repetition. The more you do it, the more it gets ingrained. The more it gets ingrained in your mind, in your body, and in your thought process. So it's just practice. If you try to out logic the logic, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
If you try to out emotion the emotion, it's not going to work. Just go with it and see what happens. We also do a fun exercise where, you know, we have them yes and each other for this whole big thing, and then we have them try it again, but with just yeah, but, which is a polite no. And see how the first thing that they did ended up to be this big, huge, spectacular, incredible thing. And then when they no butted, they just sat there and did this back and forth for 3 minutes, and nothing got anywhere.
My favorite part of teaching that exercise though is the students who think they know what answer you're going for, and I was like, how'd yes but go? And they're like, oh, just great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for asking about the great exercise you taught us. And I'm like, well, that's how I know who's gonna suck up to me the whole fucking class. And I'm like, well, what did you guys do? What did you guys end up with? And they're like, well, we didn't really agree. And I was like, yes, exactly, you didn't really agree. Yes, but is still a denial. Yes, but is, I hear you, but there's like that judgment. But is a judgment, right? But I love watching the students say, oh, I see what you're going for, and I think this is a really smart exercise, and then miss the whole point until I like sit down and correct. We did a really good job of creating nothing.
I want to hear from somebody. Oh yeah, Brian.
No, I was going to say, so for the logic folks, because again, the Monday version of this talked about the 3 different types of kind of performers. You got the heads, the hearts, and the wild cards. And the heads need to see, why should I do that? Why does this make sense? Why does it make sense for me to say, yeah, I agree with that? Because in my mind, it doesn't make sense. So you need to explain to me why it makes sense. And I think, Rick, once you figured out why it made sense, it was easier for you.
Yeah.
Sorry, called you out. The emotions, the heart players, they need to understand why they would go that route, even if it doesn't match up with how they feel.
What does it matter to you? Does the heart?
And again, that's more pushing them to go, hey, don't just be you all the time, be other people, think other ways that, feel other ways that other people might feel in certain situations, stretch yourself a little bit. And the X Factor folks, the wild cards, they're already there. They're like, oh yeah, I'm on the moon and I'm a pirate and we're fighting a dragon. Yeah. Boom.
Yeah.
Magic.
I know a big issue of mine when we first started too was finding the emotion. It still is a problem, obviously, because I'm not an emotional person. So I have to kind of act. I have to act like I see other people act. But one thing that would really get to me is when I would do something the way I would actually do it in real life. And then I'm told nobody would do that in real life. And I'm like, okay, well, so that's really kind of like, I guess I don't belong here. Kind of thing.
Something that way, Steven, you're like, oh.
I remember having to make up stories about my childhood just so I could get out of class. Like, I don't have one, so, and I'm pretty good at making up stories, I guess. So, but anyway, that's part of, once again, getting back into problems I had that maybe other people have as well, where you don't necessarily feel that emotion, but you gotta find it. And if somehow, and if that's part of the scene, then you gotta go with that. And man, it can be hard, but it's so rewarding when you actually get it right. And sometimes I do.
Wait, Steve, so are you saying when you talk about emotion, do you mean using emotion in agreement in the scene because maybe you were gifted a certain emotion by your scene partner?
Right, or the scene just calls for it, right? It's in a particular situation, I should be empathetic toward my scene partner who's laughing hysterically, and I'm just like, well, that's not funny. But I have to, if the scene calls for it, then I have to agree, and I have to show that emotion and be there for that person, for my teammate, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The common things I see in younger improvisers too is when I'm working specifically in emotion, which is something that I find to be one of my personal fortes, is working in emotion and having somebody say, well, I chose the emotion of apathy. And I was like, well, apathy is technically the lack of emotion. So choosing the emotion of apathy and showing how much you don't care about something is actually really harmful. Like, because your partner needs something from you, you need to offer something, and apathy is the absence of something.
Yeah.
If you're not offering, it's a denial. I think
I would rather have somebody tell me no than say I don't care.
Yeah, yeah.
Make
Tell me
it,
no.
make a choice.
And I think sometimes apathy is easier to choose because then it doesn't force a choice. I think choices are something that we should talk about in a later episode, because making choices is such a positive way to move forward, to agree with something, to just decide one way or another instead of waffling in indecision, right? Waffling in apathy, finding any like middle ground emotion and just living in it. You know, making a choice is what moves the scene forward, and that's all we're really trying to do, whether you're doing narrative or not. It's like we're moving the scene from point A to point B before we edit it. But to move something forward, apathy is a denial. The emotion of apathy and the lack of choice can also be a denial. It's just like, honey, just choose something for dinner, right? If you want to play that waffly character, you've got to have some emotion behind it, right? Because apathy does exist in the real world, but how do you illustrate that without totally stifling your scene partner? How do you illustrate that without stopping the motion of the scene?
And
right?
a lot of that I think comes back to judgment too, because you
Yes.
probably have an emotion, or but you're saying, oh, that's not right, I don't want to do that. Just do it, man. Whatever the first thing that comes into your mind, that's the right thing to do.
Right.
Just do it.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that there's so much to agreement in everything that you guys are telling me. There's the straight on yes agreement. There's the physicality agreement and passing the fork. Steve, you touched on agreement with emotion, maybe an agreement with character. I think that one thing that made me feel a lot better from this discussion is the knowledge that learning agreement is something that we're going to continue to get better at, always.
You mentioned Lex earlier, Lex who teaches with us at Bear. And one of the things Lex says very frequently is that as you grow up in your improv, right, one of the things that starts happening is you start abandoning your basics, right? Because you think you outgrow them. You're like, oh, well, I'm done with this because I've reached an upper echelon of education. And he uses the phrase that I love, trying to outsmart yes and, which I love, is trying to outsmart it and find another way to do what you're to do yes and without yes and it's like, honestly, go back to it. And that's one of the notes I give the most frequently to some of our upper level students is go back to your basics. Yes, I'm missing yes in your scenes. Emphatic yes, big yes, jumping in and with both feet and saying what you're doing is more important than anything I came up with, and here's how I'm adding to it. Big yes is the thing that people drop. When you're level one, it is the most important thing, and you focus on it. But as you focus on character or relationships or object work or form or thematic anything, you start dropping some of those basics, and the basics should never stop. You should always be working on agreement. You should always be working on relationships. You should always be working on and adding things that connect you and your scene partner deeper, on a deeper level. And so, yeah, I mean, agreement is something we should work on as improvisers forever. And we should never forget that. We should never lose that.
And we're talking about agreement. We'll keep saying yes and as well. And so don't forget the and. You know, the and is also important. You can agree all day, but if you just say, yeah, it is a nice day to your partner. Yeah.
The way that I think about it is that that's the gift, right? You have yes, and you have the agreement, and then you have the gift that happens afterwards. And that's the stuff that moves the scene forward. Folks, we are actually out of time. Already.
Every time.
Yeah, it goes really, really fast. For all of our viewers, we could probably continue this discussion for easily 2 or 3 hours. But we're keeping this short so that they're in nice little bite-sized chunks. I want to thank my panel for joining me today. Brian, you just have you put glasses on at the very end because
before the broadcast too, showcasing his toilet paper supply above his shoulder.
Brian Scribner, thank you so much for joining this panel. I really appreciate it. Your perspective from being a teacher was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve Circeo, your perspective, he takes off, great. You don't have to leave at this point. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. I like your perspective. Oh, excellent, great. Tina, you're gonna have to get some glasses in a second. Steve, Thank you so much for joining us. One thing that I loved about your commentary was the always learning. That makes me feel so much better, honestly, every single time that I hear that. Thank you very much. Tina Jackson, owner of, oh shit, owner of Bear Stage, the sponsor of the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing your 20 plus years of knowledge into this panel. I certainly appreciate it.
As
Great.
always, for having us, Rick. We love it.
Absolutely. I also want to thank all of our live viewers right now on Twitch. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your comments. I see a lot of stuff on here. Yeah, it's great. Thank you again.
How good it is to see Brian.
Yeah, I know. And his toilet paper stash. So for all of our viewers on Twitch, thank you again for joining us. We are going to have another show. We don't have the topic laid out yet, but we're going to have another show on Monday at 6 o'clock, same time, same channel.
We're doing it.
Yeah, a few things that I want to mention, and that's that.
Acting while you do.
Yeah, fantastic. The other thing I want to mention is that we are in crazy time, folks. I certainly hope that you appreciated this show about improv. If you're not in the San Antonio area, find your local improv theater. They're probably hurting right now, guys. And if there's a way that you can support them, support them. Bookmark their website, and as soon as quarantine is over, go and watch plenty of shows. And if you're in the San Antonio area and you have been to Bear Stage and you've watched any of us perform, or you haven't been to Bear Stage but you want to go and you want to support us, go to bearstage.com and you'll find a link where you're able to support us if you appreciate what we're doing. Thank you.
You might appreciate what we're doing.
Yeah. Thank you all again for joining me. And have a wonderful night.
Bye, guys.
You too, Rick. Thanks.
Bye, guys.